The sun was high over Makola Market, and the streets were alive with noise and color. Women called out prices of tomatoes and peppers, children weaved through the crowd carrying baskets, and traders argued cheerfully over bargains. In the middle of this busy scene, a young boy named Taye hurried along, clutching a small basket for his mother. He was thin, barefoot, and careful not to get in anyone's way, but in the crush of people, mistakes were easy to make. As he turned a corner, Taye accidentally brushed against a tall man in flowing clothes. The basket slipped from his hands, and a few oranges rolled across the dusty ground. The man, Mr. Okoro, was one of the wealthiest traders in the market. Known for his money and his temper, people usually cleared a path when he came by. Before Taye could even apologize, a sharp slap landed across his face. The sound cut through the market chatter, and everything seemed to stop for a moment. "Useless boy." Okoro spat, glaring down at him. "Is this how street rats behave?" Taye froze, his cheek burning, his small hands trembling as he bent to gather the scattered fruit. His mother, Amara, rushed forward, pulling her son close. "Please, sir, he didn't mean it," she pleaded softly, her voice shaking. But Okoro waved her off like she was nothing, his face twisted with arrogance. The crowd stood in silence. People whispered, some looking away, others watching with pity. Yet no one stepped forward. In that moment, Taye's world felt small and heavy, the noise of the market replaced by the thudding of his heart and the sting of shame on his face. Taye ran through the narrow paths that led away from Makola Market, his little feet kicking up dust as he tried to hold back his sobs. His mother called after him, but he didn't stop. His cheeks still stung from Okoro's slap, and the weight of all those eyes in the market, staring, whispering, mocking, burned deeper than the pain on his skin. By the time he reached their small wooden house at the edge of the village, tears had already soaked his face. He pushed the door open and collapsed onto the old mat in the corner, covering his head with his arms like he wanted to hide from the whole world. Amara soon walked in, carrying the empty basket he had dropped earlier. Her eyes were tired, but they softened when she saw her son trembling on them. She knelt beside him and touched his back gently. "My child," she whispered, "don't let that man's words bury your spirit." Taye lifted his face, eyes red and swollen. "Mama," he said in a broken voice, "why does he hate me? What did I do?" His question pierced her heart, because she had no answer that would make sense to a child. She pulled him close, rocking him slowly the way she did when he was little. "Life is not always kind, Taye," she told him softly, brushing his tears away with her calloused fingers. "But listen to me, your life will not always be like this. One day, things will change. You will change them. You are not useless, my son. You are more than what people see today." Her words sank into him, though the pain in his chest did not fade right away. That night, after they shared a small meal of rice and stew, Taye sat by the dim candlelight. The house was quiet, except for the sound of insects chirping outside. Amara had already drifted to sleep, her body worn from long hours in the market, but Taye's mind was too heavy to rest. He pulled out his little torn notebook, the one he kept hidden under his mat. Its pages were rough and half missing, but to him it was a treasure. It was where he wrote his thoughts, his dreams, and his secret promises to himself. With a stub of a pencil, his hand shaking slightly, he scribbled down words that had been burning in his chest all evening. "One day, I will make them respect me." He read the sentence over and over, his small lips whispering it like a prayer. A single tear rolled down his cheek, but this time it wasn't only from pain. It was a tear of determination, born out of the humiliation he felt that day. He pressed the notebook against his chest, as though holding it close could make the words come true faster. In the quiet darkness, with the flicker of the candle casting long shadows on the wall, a seed was planted inside Taye. A seed of fire that no slap, no insult, no cruelty could ever take away. By the next morning, the story of what happened in Makola Market was already spreading from stall to stall like smoke carried by the wind. People could not stop talking about it. Some told the story with pity in their voices, shaking their heads at the cruelty of it all. "That poor boy," one woman whispered as she arranged her tomatoes. "He is just a child. How can a grown man strike him like that in front of everyone?" Another trader sighed and added, "Amara is already struggling. Life is hard enough without this shame." But not everyone spoke with kindness. Some laughed when they told the tale, twisting it into a cruel joke. "Did you hear how the boy dropped his basket and scattered the oranges everywhere?" One man snickered. Okoro was right. These street children need to be taught respect. Others nodded quickly, not because they agreed, but because no one wanted to risk being seen defending the boy against a man as powerful as Okoro. Fear and pride kept many lips sealed. Okoro himself was enjoying the attention. Later that evening, he sat with his friends at a corner of the market, sipping palm wine. He leaned back in his chair, his voice loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "I taught that street rat a lesson," he boasted, his laughter carrying through the night. Next time he will learn to look where he's going. People like him should know their place. His friends laughed along, some out of habit, others out of fear of offending him. No one dared to tell him he had gone too far. Meanwhile, in their small home, Amara sat quietly with Taye. The boy had barely spoken since the incident, his eyes still clouded with sadness. He kept his little notebook close, but even as he held it, his silence worried her. She feared that the cruel words and mocking laughter from the market would sink too deeply into his heart. She pulled him close, wrapping her arms tightly around his small shoulders. "Don't listen to them, my son," she whispered, her own voice trembling. "You are not what they say. You are mine, and you are worth more than they can ever see." Taye rested his head against her chest, listening to the steady beat of her heart. Though her words comforted him, the voices of the community still echoed in his mind. The whispers of pity, the cruel laughter, the boastful voice of Okoro calling him useless. Each sound carved itself into his memory. The gossip of Makola Market carried on for days, and for most people it was nothing more than another story to talk about before moving on with their lives. But for Taye and Amara, it was a wound that stayed open, a reminder of how harsh the world could be. Still, beneath the sting of humiliation, something else was quietly growing inside Taye, an unspoken promise that one day, the same people who gossiped would whisper a very different story about him. Life did not grow easier for Taye after the market incident. If anything, it became heavier. Every time he walked through Makola, some people still whispered about the slap. Some even smirked at him, as if his shame was a story that would never grow old. But Taye had no choice except to keep going. His mother needed help, and his dreams were bigger than the laughter of those who mocked him. He began to take on small jobs in the market and around the neighborhood. At sunrise, he carried heavy buckets of water for families who could afford to pay. His thin arms ached as he balanced the loads, but he never complained. In the afternoons, he swept stalls, clearing piles of rotten vegetables and trash. Sometimes he sold fruits in the market, standing in the hot sun with dust clinging to his legs as he shouted prices to passing customers. He earned only a few coins each day, but to Taye, those coins meant survival, and sometimes they even meant a chance at school. At night, when the world grew quiet and many children were already fast asleep, Taye lit a small candle and bent over scraps of paper. He had no proper textbooks, so he used old newspapers he found in trash piles, reading headlines again and again, trying to understand the big words. When luck smiled on him, a kind neighbor or an older student would lend him a tattered book. He treated those books as treasures, reading every page as if it was gold. There were nights when hunger gnawed at his belly, making it hard to focus. Some evenings, he went to bed without eating, his head dizzy but his heart determined. Children his age sometimes laughed at him, calling him bookworm or mocking his worn-out clothes. "What is the use of studying?" they teased. "You will still end up poor." But Taye refused to answer them. Instead, he turned their mockery into fuel, gripping his pencil tighter, telling himself that one day they would see the difference. Amara watched her son with pride and pain. She worked long hours in the market, but still earned barely enough to feed them. Many times, she pretended she wasn't hungry so that Taye could have the larger portion of their small meal. Quietly, she saved little by little, even when it meant skipping her own needs. When exam season came, she sold her best cloth, one of the last things of value she owned, just so she could pay for Taye's exam form. "My son must have his chance," she told herself, even as her stomach tightened from missed meals. Taye knew what she was giving up for him, and it fueled him even more. Each word he read under the candlelight, each page he copied into his torn notebook, felt like a step closer to freedom, not just for him, but for her too. His struggle was not only his own, it was their shared fight against poverty, against shame, against every cruel word the world had thrown at them. And in the quiet of their small home, with the candle flickering low, Taye's determination burned brighter than ever. Years rolled by, and Taye's nights of candlelight study began to bear fruit. He wrote exams with shaky hands but with a steady heart, always remembering his mother's sacrifices. Each result he passed pushed him a little further, until one day, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was a scholarship, an offer to study economics at a prestigious university in Cape Town. The paper trembled in his hands as he read the words over and over, hardly believing they were meant for him. When Amara saw the letter, her eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth, whispering a prayer of thanks. She had dreamed of this day but never dared to say it aloud. Pulling her son into her arms, she held him so tightly it was as if she was afraid he would disappear. "My son," she whispered through her tears, "go and prove them wrong. Go and show them that no insult can stop a determined heart." The news spread quickly through Makola. Some people congratulated Taye, shaking their heads in wonder. Others smirked and whispered, doubting that a boy from the dusty streets could survive in a foreign city among the children of the rich. "He won't last there," one man said. Cape Town is not for boys who sold fruits in the sun. Another added, he'll return in shame. Mark my words. Their words stung, but Taye only tightened his grip on his little notebook, where he had once written the promise of respect. He carried those doubts like fuel for his fire. The day of his departure was both joyful and painful. Amara packed his few belongings in a small bag, just some clothes, his notebook, and a pen. They stood at the edge of the bus station, mother and son holding hands as if neither wanted to let go. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady when she said, "Remember, Taye, education is your weapon. Use it to lift yourself, and never forget where you came from." He nodded, his own throat tight, unable to find words. As the bus engine roared to life, Taye looked out the window, watching the faces of his neighbors, the dusty paths, the stalls of Makola Market where his childhood had been shaped by pain and struggle. He saw the very ground where Okoro had once slapped him, and instead of shame, he felt a wave of determination. He promised himself he would never return the same boy who had been humiliated in front of a crowd. The bus pulled away, and Amara's figure grew smaller and smaller, her hand still raised in blessing. Taye leaned back in his seat, clutching his notebook to his chest. He was afraid, yes, but inside him there was a quiet fire that no one could see. His journey was no longer only about escaping poverty. It was about proving to the world, and to himself, that the boy once called useless would become a man everyone would respect. Cape Town felt like another world to Taye. The city was bigger, brighter, and faster than anything he had known back in Makola. At first, the tall buildings and polished classrooms made him feel small, but he refused to be swallowed by fear. He remembered his mother's words, and every night, he reminded himself of the promise he had written years ago. One day, I will make them respect me. At the university, Taye threw himself into his studies with the same fire he once used to read by candlelight. Economics quickly became his passion. He loved learning how money, trade, and policy shaped people's lives. His professors noticed him not only because of his intelligence, but also because of his discipline. While other students partied late into the night, Taye spent his evenings buried in books, determined to squeeze every drop of knowledge from the opportunity he had been given. But Taye didn't stop at his own success. He remembered what it felt like to be the boy with no books, no light, and no chance. He began small initiatives to help other poor students. He organized study groups, shared his notes freely, and later started a program to collect used textbooks from wealthier students and distribute them to those who couldn't afford them. Soon, his name was being spoken not just in classrooms, but across the campus. He wasn't just a brilliant student, he was a leader. The local newspapers picked up his story. They wrote about the boy from Makola Market who had once sold fruits to survive, now standing tall as one of the brightest minds in his class. Invitations began to pour in. He was asked to speak at youth events, to mentor younger students, and eventually, he was offered opportunities to travel abroad for conferences. Wherever he went, Taye carried his story with humility, always giving credit to his mother's sacrifices. He often said, "My mother's hunger became my fuel. Her tears watered my dreams." Those words touched hearts everywhere he went. Back in Ghana, life was changing too, but not for the better. Mr. Okoro, the once powerful trader who had slapped a child in the middle of Makola Market, was facing his own struggles. His arrogance and greed had finally caught up with him. He raised prices unfairly, cheated his partners, and looked down on customers. Slowly, people stopped trusting him. His friends, once drawn to his wealth, began to drift away. His business, once the pride of the market, started to crumble. While Taye's name was rising across borders, Okoro's was sinking in his own backyard. He grew bitter, yet deep down, a shadow of shame lingered whenever he remembered that day in the market. The day he humiliated a boy who had now become a man respected by many. Taye, however, never wasted time thinking of revenge. His focus was on building, on lifting others, on proving that pain could be transformed into strength. And with every achievement, his mother's words echoed louder. Life would not always be cruel. He was living proof. Life had a cruel way of teaching lessons. Just as Okoro's business began to fail, a deeper tragedy struck. His only son, little Emeka, fell gravely ill. The illness came suddenly, cruel and unrelenting, leaving Okoro frantic and desperate. He tried to call in favors, reaching out to old friends who once admired his wealth and status. But the world had moved on, and one by one, doors closed in his face. No one was willing to lend him money. No one wanted to risk helping the man who had always put himself first. Okoro paced his empty living room, staring at the ceiling as fear clawed at his chest. The expensive furniture and gold-plated trinkets that had once defined his power now felt meaningless. He thought about the doctor's bills, the medicines, the constant worry. How could he save his son when he had no one left to turn to? Humiliation gnawed at him. The pride that had once made him slap a small boy in the market now seemed like a foolish weight around his neck. And then he remembered Taye. The boy he had mocked, humiliated, and called useless. That same boy, he had heard, was now a respected man, educated, recognized, and powerful. Okoro's heart sank as he realized that the very person he had scorned could be the only hope for his son. Shame mixed with fear as he admitted to himself that he had been wrong all along. He hesitated, pride warring with desperation. Could he swallow his arrogance and reach out to the boy he had hurt so badly? Could he trust that someone who had every reason to hold a grudge would still have compassion? Yet the thought of Emeka's weak cries, the images of the hospital corridors he had wandered helplessly, pushed him forward. For the first time in his life, he felt small, powerless, and completely dependent on someone else's mercy. When he finally stepped into the hospital where Taye's foundation had begun helping children in need, his chest tightened. The familiar face of the boy he had once slapped stared back at him, not with malice, not with revenge, but with calm authority. The memory of that market incident hit him like a punch. Taye's calm, steady eyes reminded him of the years he had wasted, of the humility he had ignored, and of the pain he had caused. Okoro dropped to his knees in the middle of the hallway, tears streaming down his face. Please, please help my son, he whispered, his voice cracking. Pride and shame battled within him, but desperation won. Around him, people passed, giving curious glances, but Taye did not turn away. At that moment, Okoro understood the depth of his past mistakes. The boy he had once crushed with a slap had become a man who could save lives. And yet, here he was, offering help without a word of judgment. Humiliation, regret, and hope collided in his chest, leaving him shaking. This was the moment fate had chosen. The proud man brought low, standing before the child he had once thought worthless, now the one with the power to heal. The truth was clear. Life had a way of balancing scales, and Okoro was finally feeling the weight of his own arrogance. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and medicine, a mix that made Okoro's stomach twist with nerves. He had never imagined he would enter a building like this under such circumstances, begging, pleading for the life of his only son. The corridors were bright and quiet, filled with nurses moving quickly, but it felt as though the whole world had stopped for him. And then he saw him. Taye was standing near the children's ward, talking quietly with a doctor. His presence filled the room with calm authority. He looked older, stronger, and more confident than the boy he once knew in Makola Market. For a moment, Okoro could barely breathe. The man who had once been useless, in his eyes now radiated respect, intelligence, and compassion. Shock froze him in place. Memories of that day, the slap, the public humiliation, it all came rushing back, sharper than ever. Without thinking, without any pride left to protect, Okoro fell to his knees. Please, he said, voice breaking, tears running freely. Please forgive me. I was wrong. I was a fool. He covered his face with trembling hands, unable to meet the eyes of the man he had once hurt so deeply. Each word felt like a confession, a release of years of arrogance, shame, and guilt. Taye looked down at him, his heart beating fast. He remembered every insult, every laugh of the crowd that had watched him crumble in the market. He could feel the old anger rising, a memory of humiliation that had never truly left him. But then he remembered his mother's words, "Never repay evil with evil." He took a slow breath, letting the tension leave his shoulders. "Kneeling won't undo the past," Taye said quietly, his voice steady but kind. "But it does take courage to admit your mistakes. Your son needs help. Let's focus on that." There was no mockery in his tone, no revenge, only a calm decision to act. Okoro's hands shook as he nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The humility he felt was deep, raw, and almost painful. For the first time in his life, wealth and power meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was saving Emeka, and this man, the boy he had once called useless, was the key. Taye led him through the ward, explaining the treatments and what needed to be done. Okoro listened, silent, humbled, and grateful. Every step reminded him how far he had fallen, how cruel pride had been, and how life had given him a chance to make things right. He had imagined this meeting would be terrifying, but it was also a kind of relief, a cleansing of years of arrogance and regret. As he watched Taye check on his son, Okoro realized something profound. Respect was not about money, power, or fear. It was about character, compassion, and the courage to rise above anger. The boy he had once crushed had become a man who could teach him the greatest lesson of all. And in that moment, Okoro felt both the weight of his past and the first glimmer of hope for redemption. The hospital room buzzed with quiet activity, but the air felt heavy with tension. Okoro sat by his son's bed, still weak from the past weeks of worry, guilt, and sleepless nights. He had already humbled himself in ways he never imagined, but now he faced a different kind of surprise. Taye, calm and steady, stepped forward and placed his hand on Okoro's shoulder. "Your son will be fine," he said simply. "The bills are taken care of. Focus on him." Okoro froze, disbelief written across his face. Why?" he he stammered. He wanted to protest, to insist he could pay, but the words stuck in his throat. The same boy he had once slapped in the market, the boy he had humiliated without reason, was now saving his son's life without a single word of revenge. Tears welled up, but this time they were a mix of relief and shame. Later, in a small gathering in the hospital courtyard, Taye spoke. People from the community, the university, and the hospital staff had come to witness the moment. Okoro stood silently, humbled, his shoulders slumped. Taye raised his voice, clear and steady, carrying both pain and hope. "When you hit me, you gave me pain," he said, looking directly at Okoro. "That pain could have broken me. It could have made me bitter and cruel. But I chose another path. That pain became my strength. It taught me to work harder, to rise above hatred, and to help others, even those who once hurt me." A hush fell over the crowd. Every eye was on Okoro, who now could no longer hide the weight of years spent in arrogance and pride. He bowed his head, sobbing openly for the first time in public. The money, the power, the respect he once thought defined him, all of it felt empty. He realized that his own cruelty had isolated him, destroyed relationships, and left him helpless when he needed help the most. Taye continued, softer now but no less powerful. "Life will give you opportunities to repay evil with evil," he said. "But forgiveness, compassion, and humility, these are the things that truly change the world." He looked at Okoro, whose tears fell freely, and then at everyone present. "I forgive you, and I hope that your son's life reminds you that it is never too late to change." The community watched in awe. They had seen Taye grow from a small, beaten boy in Makola Market into a man of integrity and strength. And they witnessed Okoro's public reckoning with his mistakes, a man humbled by the very person he had once crushed. As Emeka's health improved, Okoro stayed close, learning from Taye not just how to care for his son, but also how to rebuild his life with humility. In that courtyard, forgiveness and redemption were not just words. They were lived, felt, and seen by everyone around. And in that moment, the boy who had once cried quietly at home had become a man whose strength healed both the innocent and the guilty alike. Okoro's sobs softened, his shoulders shook, but in that trembling moment, he understood something he never had before. Respect and love could never be bought. They could only be earned, and Taye had earned both, fully and beautifully. The sun rose over Makola Market, painting the streets with warm golden light as the community gathered. Today was special. Taye had returned, not just as a successful man, but with a dream realized. A school was being built on the old dusty lot where children had once played among carts and baskets. Its walls were bright, the paint fresh, and above the gate, a sign read, Amara's Hope Academy. Taye had named it after his mother, the woman whose love and courage had kept him going through every hardship. People crowded around, some with smiles, some wiping tears. Children ran excitedly, imagining a place where they could learn, where knowledge could be their escape, just as it had been for Taye. Amara stood nearby, her hands clasped, watching her son direct the construction. Her eyes shimmered with pride and relief. "Life has repaid with justice," she whispered to a neighbor, her voice strong but tender. "My son turned his tears into power." Among the workers, Taye noticed Okoro, humble and quiet, lifting bricks and mixing cement alongside everyone else. Gone was the arrogance, the pride, the wealth that once made him untouchable. He worked as any laborer would, with sweat on his brow and humility in his heart. Every motion was a silent apology, a testament to how far he had fallen and how much he had learned. Taye approached him briefly, placing a hand on his shoulder. No words were needed, there was understanding between them now. Okoro's eyes welled with tears, but they were not of pride. They were of shame, gratitude, and a deep recognition of the boy he had once crushed, now the man who had lifted him in his moment of despair. The school buzzed with life as the first foundation stones were laid, and the community cheered. In the warm Ghanaian sun, amid laughter and the clatter of construction, a story of pain, perseverance, and forgiveness reached its peak. Taye's dream had grown beyond him, becoming a beacon of hope, and for Okoro, it became a lesson he would never forget.